Hi, everybody. Right, so I am the co-founder and CEO of Anapi. We are, like Uma said, we're trying to make insurance much easier for startups, small businesses, and entrepreneurs. My background actually is in insurance. I worked for 10 years for a large corporate insurance company, and for about 5 years of that, I was in the enterprise risk function. So I was actually helping our company understand our own risks, how to mitigate, how to avoid, how to manage risks. So that was very much my world within risk management. I came out of that and became more of an entrepreneur. And about 3 years ago, we co-founded Anapi, and we're really trying to help small businesses understand their risks better, help them be better protected, and insurance is one way to be able to do that. So today I really want to talk to you guys about, well, the title of the presentation is how to avoid curveball risks. And I purposely use that word curveball because, you know, it comes out of nowhere. You are not expecting it. I know as business owners, there's so many things on your plate, so many expectations and high growth plans that, you know, curveballs can really come out of nowhere and, diminish you. And we don't want that. We want to help the startup ecosystem become strong and vibrant. And that's what I'm really here to talk about today. I'm going to give you a really, really simple framework as to how to look at your risks. And then we're going to go into some detail as to some key risks, give you a bit of an overview so you understand what's out there in terms of how you can be protecting yourselves. So Azra is going to help me drive my presentation. If you mind starting on the next slide, please. This is basically what I'm calling like the universe of the startup of, what's probably on your plate and what's top of mind at the moment for you. It's related to product, getting product market fit, your people, finding the right talent, employee engagement. And then there's a whole thing around, I'm sure you're busy with, like fundraising. What's my runway left? Do I need to fundraise next year? How's it going to work? How has it been working for you in this year with COVID? There's a million things going on in your mind. And I guess that's kind of the part of fun, at least for me, being an entrepreneur, is you really get to see the 360 view of running a business and everything that comes with that. However, with that comes these risks. Azra, if you mind just clicking on the next button. There's so many risks out there, and this is not even everything, right? These are just some things I thought of off the top of my head. And some of these things are totally not in your control, right? Like COVID-19, where did that come from? And how that's had an impact on the economy. No one could have predicted that. That was totally out of our control. Same with, new entrants coming to the market. You don't know what's going to happen in your industry. Same with like regulatory changes. And then there's also things that are sort of in your control, like, I made a mistake and now I've got to pay for the ramifications of that. We've had a data breach. So there are a whole bunch of things that can go wrong. And they do go wrong from time to time. Sometimes minor, but sometimes pretty major. So what I want to get you guys thinking about, and I do want to make this session quite interactive, and I want to be using the chat function. On the next slide, I do have a question to ask you all. What do you think is the biggest risk to your business that will prevent growth? And I've just got 5 things here. Product market fit, talent, fundraising, economic factors, or your own execution. If you could just pop that in the chat for me, A, B, C, D, or E. I would love to know what you think is the biggest risk for you, for your business. Obviously, there's no wrong answers. Just love to kind of see where, what you guys think is the biggest risk. Okay, we've got a couple of product market fit. give you guys a few more seconds. Don't be shy. Okay, so we're getting a bit of a mixed bag. A few more seconds, A, B, C, D, or E. One or two more people want to contribute? Okay, that's fine. So we have, from what I can see, execution, product market fit, and economic factors. So yeah, kind of like split across. Okay, so the next slide is basically a framework that I want to give you guys to help you start thinking about your risks. Ezra, do you mind just moving to the next slide, please? I mentioned before in my intro that, you know, I come from an insurance background and from risk management as well. You know, I did work for a very large global multinational company, and so it was very, very rigorous. We had a proper team in place, you know, lots of processes in place. There's no way startups can implement anything similar to that, you know. We just don't have the resources. So what I want to give you guys is something very, very simple to implement yourselves that you can do half an hour, just to get you thinking about what your risks are out there. And you really want to start with your growth goals. It's kind of a great time of year now, you know, we're getting to the end of the year. I think everyone is so happy to be leaving 2020 behind, and we're all looking forward to 2021, especially with all this news about the vaccine and everything. So I think there's a lot of positivity coming into the new year, a lot of hope for new growth and opportunities. So really start, you know, look, I'm keeping things simple, keeping things in threes here. So what are your top goals? Key goals that you really want to focus on in the new year. And then for each one of those, think about, okay, what are these risks? Is it fundraising, right? If I don't get my fundraising, we're going to run out of money. We're not going to be able to grow. Is it not being able to get marketing, right? It's customer acquisition or whatever it is. Just pop it down. Customers not paying, whatever it is. And the idea is, you know, it's a quick sort of exercise that you and your colleagues should be doing together to brainstorm together. And I think it's always really helpful to get things down, written down, rather than just thinking on the top of your head. So I would really recommend something like this as a way to identify, okay, you know what, I've got 9 risks. So like your top 10 risks that you want to focus on, and identify and see what you want to do with that next. So in the next slide, what I'm going to show you is a risk matrix. So once you've got those 9 written down, on the next slide, please, Azra, is like a matrix as to how to assess it. And like I mentioned before, you know, we're all startups. We don't have those resources, so you can't be actively managing everything with a fine-tooth comb and making sure you've got 100 controls in place. You know, we've got to be able to take risks, and that's kind of the fun of being in a startup. You get to take risks and try new things and be flexible and agile. So when you've got your, let's say, your top 10 risks, try plotting them on this matrix. So look at, okay, what's likely to happen? What's more likely to happen than another one that's low likelihood? What would have a major consequence? So that could be like a financial impact versus not so major or pretty minor consequence. So basically anything in that kind of bottom left quadrant, you think, all right, that can be safely ignored. And I just want to make the point here that these risks are going to be really different for every business, right? So a risk of a customer not paying for a company that has, you know, pretty low valued products, you know, so the consequence of that is, okay, it's like $10 or so if customer X doesn't pay. That's pretty minor consequence. That's probably going to be in that bucket A. Whereas for other companies where, you know, they've got large contracts, huge concentration or reliance on certain suppliers or customers. And if they're not paying, actually that's going to be a major consequence. And then, you know, you've got to think about the economic environment that we're in. Maybe that likelihood's going to be higher as well. So for another company, that could be in that quadrant C, where you actually need to be monitoring it more, or even in the bracket D, where it's a really major consequence. Maybe it's not so likely that it'll happen, but hey, maybe there's insurance you can buy for that if my big customer doesn't pay. So yeah, my point being that the risks that you're identifying will be very different on how you plot it on this matrix to another company. So it's really important just to have this, you know, this think through with your colleagues, where these risks really fit on this matrix. And, you know, the ones where you put an A, okay, you've done your job, you've identified it, and you can feel good about, okay, you know, I've identified it. I'm happy to put that there and safely ignore that because it's within, you know, my risk tolerance. I don't have enough time to be monitoring all these tiny little risks. I can move on to the next other quadrants. So in the other ones, you want to be looking at, okay, are there things that I can be doing to be changing behavior that will mitigate the risks? In C, that's what you really want to be focusing on. And hopefully you don't have too many up in that bucket. An example of C, of someone having it in C, could be a company like, let's say if you are a company that deals with a lot of personal data, let's say you're in the health or medical industry, so not just personal data like date of birth, but you've got people's personal health records. That's like huge major consequence if something was to happen to that. And maybe the likelihood is quite high because you've got high volume and high transactions, whereas somebody else who's not dealing with personal data, maybe is only dealing with like corporate businesses, a B2B business, not really, yeah, transacting too much on personal data. Maybe that risk for them is on D. It's a major consequence if something does happen, but it's a lower likelihood. So again, you really want to be thinking about the risk specific to your company. And then in the quadrant D about risk transfer through insurance, that's a great way to get rid of the, well, not get rid, but yeah, I suppose it's get passing that risk on to a third party, which is an insurance company who has a really big balance sheet, who can weather those really large consequences. And that can be a really smart way for you to feel a little bit more comfortable, like, okay, I don't have a huge financial burden if something does happen. I can just pay a relatively small premium and an insurance company can take care of it. So that's definitely one way to manage risks. The other one that I encourage you guys to be looking into is that quadrant C. I do identify the ones there, think about what sort of actions you need to put in place, controls, just so you make sure you're monitoring that risk. What we're going to do next is I'm going to focus on a few risks that I think fall into that quadrant A, the insurance, the risk transfer section. And the first one is around legal risks. So I have a few questions for you guys. I'm hoping a few more people will participate in the question. How much do you think an average lawsuit costs a small business in Singapore? A, B, C, or D, so 50K, 100K, 250, or 500K. If you could just pop it in the chat, A, B, C, or D, let me know what you think. Okay, we've got a couple of B's for 100K. Anybody else have a different opinion? Okay, 100K. So, Azra, if you just click onto the next button, please. Based on our discussions with insurers here, we're looking closer to $250,000, which is a lot of money that can be coming out of your bank account if you're going to a lawsuit. As you know, with lawsuits, you're dealing with lawyers. Those bills kind of rack up pretty quickly for your defense costs, and then you've also got like the settlements that the court decides on. So yeah, it can get pretty expensive. The next question, Azra, if you don't mind moving to the next slide, is what percentage of startups fail due to legal challenges? So we know I think there's a common stat out there that, is it 90% of startups fail within the first 3 years, something like that? And I think mostly they fail because of running out of money, running out of funding. But what percentage do you think is attributed due to legal challenges? Is it 2%, 10, 20, or 45%? What do you think? C, 20%. Anybody else want to have a shot at it? Everyone seems kind of shy to have a guess. So thank you, Sharon and Zah. Okay, Azra, you want to click on the next one to show everybody? It's 10%. It's actually not that much, right? 1 in 10. And that's kind of why we think legal risks fall in that quadrant A, the top left from that matrix before, because, I mean, if you're on average having to fork out 250K, that's a pretty major consequence, I would say. But the likelihood of that is pretty small, right? It's only 10%. So that's why it's up in that quadrant. Okay, next slide, please. So here I want to talk about, just dive into these legal risks a little bit more, and who are the sources, where do these lawsuits come from, right? And we think mostly there are 3 stakeholders that we're talking about when it comes to lawsuits. So firstly, your customers. They are the ones who receive your products, and they can be vocal about things if things don't go the way they expect it to. So one being faulty products. So this being, if they bought something from you and it's, let's say it's exploded or whatever, the battery's exploded and they've suffered a burn and they suffered some sort of bodily injury, that's definitely a source of a lawsuit. Another another possibility is, especially with a lot of companies now in tech, a lot of companies are SaaS companies providing advice, consultation, AI, in a tech format. There are potential lawsuits here if there's an error in a report that you've given, or some sort of advice or consultation that you've provided. There's an error or an omission and your customer's unhappy. They might have lost money as a result of the service that you've provided. That's grounds for a lawsuit, and they can potentially come to you and say, hey, I've lost X. I demand, I'm looking for compensation for that. So customers are definitely one stakeholder group that are a source of lawsuits. The next one, Azra, if you mind clicking, employees. We are in the environment of quick hiring and firing, especially in a startup, when you need to find the right fit, the right cultural fit with people. And we are on high growth plans, targets, pressure, and you need to find the right people for your team. And I think this is where this whole quick hiring and firing comes into place. And unfortunately, this leads to risks of employees claiming that they were dismissed unfairly, or they were discriminated against and missed out on a promotion or whatever. We're seeing this happen more and more in Singapore, so it is a risk that's becoming bigger and bigger. So employees definitely is another big, strong stakeholder group when it comes to the lawsuits. And the third one I want to bring up as for on the slide, is investors. So you have investors, you have shareholders. If you're trying to fundraise, if you're trying to get new investors on board, you need to be selling yourself as a company. And, there are claims where investors say, hey, to the founders, like, you misrepresented your financials. It's actually, you made it out to be much healthier than what it is, or claims that management has breached their duty of trust, or has mismanaged the company. So they are another key stakeholder, we believe, when it comes to legal risks, mainly because investors kind of see into the hood and really see under what's happening in the company. And, there's always a chance of someone being upset. And unfortunately, a lot of the times people turn to legal action for that. So, so there's these three stakeholder groups that we think are pretty key when it comes to the legal risks. What I want to talk about now is insurance that can protect against these things. So there's mainly three legal related insurance products for this. For faulty products, there's a product called product liability, and that is really, like I mentioned before, if someone gets hurt as a result of your product, that insurance covers the legal costs for representing you in that lawsuit. Professional indemnity is similar, but it's for the errors and omissions in your products, and it's not for bodily injury claims. It's more lawsuits where your customers are claiming they've lost money as a result of your service. So those two are very much product kind of related for related to your customers that would be suing. And then directors and officers is, it's an interesting policy because it's all three of them: product liability, professional indemnity, PI, or D&O, directors and officers. They're all bought on a company level. So you buy it for the entity and it protects the entity. But D&O is interesting because it protects the individual directors, officers, employees, even who are working in a management capacity. So for example, an HR manager or a finance manager. Now, D&O is also special because directors, if they're personally named in this lawsuit, it's not the company's, even though you might have a limited liability company, that doesn't protect you. So the company acts as, the company cannot pay for your defense costs. You have to fork that out yourself. So in the previous slides that we asked, we had the poll about, what's the average legal cost in Singapore for a small business. So 250K, if you're named in a lawsuit and you're a director, that's 250K from your own personal assets. So directors and officers are definitely put in a different, held in a different light. And this insurance product is there to protect those individuals as well as the entity. So that's something a little bit special about D&O insurance. Okay, so we're going to take a shift now. That was kind of the overview that I wanted to give you about legal risks, talking about the different sort of stakeholders involved, the very, very, very quick overview on the types of insurance that are available. We're going to take a shift now and talk about cyber risks. So in the next slide, what we have here is some headlines that have been in the papers in the last, some of them are really new in the last month or so, some of them have been around for a couple of years. But these are mostly household names. I'm sure everyone's heard of these companies before within the region in Asia Pacific. And, these are really big cyber attacks or breaches. And there's just so much happening in the media. I feel like I see something, a household name mentioned in some sort of cyber incident on a weekly basis. On the next slide, we're going to go to another poll. And I really want to ask you guys, so these headlines are all large companies. On the poll on the next slide, I'm going to be asking you about what about small businesses? So what percentage of all cyber attacks are actually targeting small businesses? A, B, C, or D? Okay, so we've got a couple of B's and a couple of C's. Okay, as for to reveal the answer, yeah, 46%, which is basically half. So if you think about all those headlines we see in the news, about just as many, right, are also happening to small companies that you've probably not have heard of. They're also being the target of these attacks. The next question is, what percentage of cyber incidents are attributed to the human factor? So we know we can always talk about cybersecurity and everything, but what percentage is actually down to someone, a human doing something or not doing something? So Anil says 55%, C 35, 25. Okay, so quite a bit of a split. Okay. Asra, do you mind revealing it to us, what the stat says? Yeah, 55%, just over half, comes down to us, like humans. There is this, always comes to mind this example of a claim that one of the insurance companies told me. He said their client on paper was really, really good, as in had all the security measures in place. So from an underwriting standpoint, you want to insure them because they've got all their checks and controls in place. But their claim came because one of their employees was at a hotel, must have been a weekend away or a holiday, and the guy was working his laptop, didn't lock his laptop, went for a dip in the swimming pool, came back and the laptop was gone. And he didn't lock it, it was totally gone. I can't remember what the company was. I mean, they didn't disclose any of the names anyway, but yeah, pretty massive claim because it was down to the human error at the end of the day. So yeah, pretty significant, I'd say, with 55%. Right, the last question I have for you today is, what percentage of small businesses will go out of business 6 months following a cyber attack? Do we have a couple of Bs? Anybody else want to have a go? Another B? Okay, 10%. Okay. All right. Azra, show us what the stats says. 60%, which I think is absolutely astounding. I was really astounded when I saw this one. And I think it comes down to multiple things. It's partly because it costs a lot of money, but it's also your business gets interrupted, reputation damage, all that. I think there's so many different factors that go into why a business would go out of, would have to close down. This afternoon, interestingly enough, I have a podcast and I talk to different startups. I interview different startups about different risks. And this afternoon, I was talking to one about a cyber attack that they had earlier this year when they were just soft launching their company. And it was a very well coordinated attack on their new website, on their new launch. And it took them 2 days to recover. Basically, someone came in and redirected, took over all of their accounts. And it took them 2 days to get everything back, to prove that they were who they said they were. And they were saying, like, yeah, we were really lucky that it happened at the soft launch of their business. They hadn't actually gotten business yet. They weren't revenue making yet. So if this happened 6 months down the line, that would have been a different story. And then it wasn't just the fact that they had to stop business for 2 days and then try and solve this issue. It was also the reputation they had with all of the vendors and everything else, or their business partners. So I can definitely see the 60% actually being true, because, I mean, 2 days, maybe 2 days, I think is pretty quick. I mean, it could have been a week for other companies. Like, things can spiral out of control pretty quickly. So I think that's a really shocking stat. That one that really sticks in my mind, that cyber attacks shouldn't be thought of lightly, because it really does have massive financial impact on your business. Okay, enough with the polls. We're going to talk a little bit about more about cyber risks in general. As we're on the next slide, if you mind. These are just some things that are floating around when we think about cyber risks. We know that in COVID, we've seen an increase of incidents happening. A lot of it is because people are working from home now. Another shocking thing that I've learned recently is there's such thing as ransomware as a service. So that means you don't even have to be that great of a cyber criminal. You could get ransomware as a service, and then you can start sending out ransomware to lots of different people and earning money that way. So it's really shocking what's happening at the moment. Obviously, if you have personal data, maybe you're at higher risk, but I think the norm at the moment is a spray and pray. Everyone is just going out there. I mean, I've seen so many phishing emails and even phone calls. Like, it's pretty insane what's happening in the cyber world at the moment. On the next slide, I want to talk a bit about resilience, of what you guys can be doing to build up your resilience in your companies. And the first one is really, I think, a no-brainer. We saw earlier about people being such a high factor for incidents happening. So you want to make sure your staff are aware of what's happening in the risk landscape. You want to make sure you're encrypting your data, backing it up, have a plan in place, test it. I feel like these are all no-brainer kind of things that everyone should be doing. When it comes to cybersecurity, there are so many firms out there. I mean, it's big business and it's booming right now. You can hire them and do some security assessments, make yourself you feel comfortable, where your gaps are and filling those gaps. You could even hire them on a retainer basis in case you do get an incident, and then you've got the incident response teams to come and fix things for you if and when things do happen. And then there's cyber insurance, and that's it's kind of like the cybersecurity. You get a cybersecurity firm to come in when there is an incident. They come and fix the stuff. They do an analysis, forensic analysis, what's gone wrong, how do we fix it. I mentioned before about business interruption. If you are a business and you have to close down for a week or 2 days or whatever it is, you've lost revenue, right? You've had to close your site down. So insurance covers for that. So they pay out for what you would have, what you lost in terms of that revenue. There's also legal aspect to cyber. What if you've you breached or lost one of your clients' data, right? And they come after you. That's another legal risk. So cyber insurance also has legal defense costs if you need to defend yourself. And then there's public relations expenses if you need to patch things up, in the PR world about your business. So cyber insurance I like to think of that more as like a service rather than your traditional insurance. A lot of us, when we think of insurance, at least our own personal lives, like if you have a car, if you have a house, and you have insurance and there's a claim on that, you have to go sort things out yourself sometimes, and then you send the bill to the insurer, and then they, reimburse you. Whereas with cyber insurance, when something happens, you get this full package, and they come and do everything for you. The cyber security team will come, boots on the ground, to help sort out the situation. So we like to think of it as more of a solution rather than an insurance. I mean, it is an insurance, but it's a great solution like that. So that actually brings me to the end of what I wanted to discuss today with you guys, and then we can open up for questions. On the last slide, Azra, it's just, you know, we have such great plans, growth plans, you know, especially as I talked at the beginning, like, you know, 2021, we're all looking forward to getting there and leaving 2020 behind. We have so many things to think about and plans, and it's exciting. It's really exciting to be in this sort of phase in the company. But there's always going to be risks that come out of nowhere. And I'm hoping that what I've just spoken about, the tools that I've given you, this very simple framework, just helps you think about your goals, your risks, what are they, and then help you kind of prioritize what you need to do to make sure you're on top of the ones that are likely to happen and have a higher consequence. And, you know, insurance is there for those really curveball kind of risks, which can really wipe out your balance sheet, which might not happen, have a very high likelihood, but when it does happen, it can totally wipe you out. So I just want to encourage you to start thinking about insurance as a way to manage your risks that way. Utma had referenced earlier in the intro that, you know, we will be in the new year going to deep dive into some of these insurance topics further, setting up the clinics. So if you guys have specific questions on your company, like we want to do a deep dive on your risk and understand how insurance can help, that's absolutely something that I'll be able to help you guys with. And I think actually I've got one last slide with just my details on there, and so thank you for your time, and then I think we'll open up to questions. And I can see that one has come through already in the Q&A. So someone has asked, when you say customer data, how can we better utilize their data to reduce risk? I'm not sure about utilizing their data per se. I think the point I was making before was when you have customer data, that potentially opens you up to cyber risks, or if you were to accidentally lose that data, breach that, you know, there are fines, regulatory fines in place. So that's something you want to be careful about. And what customer data for you might be a different sort of risk to another company's customers' data. So my point on that slide was you need to know what is that risk for you, how you'd want to utilize that. I think it's more about what are the measures you need to put in place. Do you need to, it kind of goes back to the cyber points before about making sure you have everything encrypted and protected. And if you really are, you know, dealing with a lot of high volume, potentially having a cybersecurity firm to look into how your company is set up and your controls in place, that might be a good thing, so that you've got your gaps covered. Are there any other questions? Hopefully I answered that question okay, and if there's any other questions that you guys want to ask. Everyone seems quite shy today. What other risks do you think might surface other than the legal and cyber risks? So I guess you're asking in terms of maybe that top left quadrant, the large one, the major consequences type risks. I think a lot other risks that might come up are, you know, regulatory related. So I always think back to like the situation we've been in with COVID, right? That's kind of changed the landscape. And, you know, we haven't really seen this in Singapore yet, but potentially what if, you know, in Singapore, with all these safe entry type protocols and things, and what if a company hasn't done that properly and a new cluster breaks out, right? I think there's potential risk there of not just, okay, yes, the virus getting bigger again and having a new cluster, but I think that's another type of legal risk that might be coming out. Then people might be coming back to you and suing you, going, hey, you didn't put the right protocols in place. So I think that's one that's sort of legal related. I think one that might be coming up, maybe not so much here in Asia just yet, but I can kind of see it happening first in the US because, you know, the US is much more litigious. Again, COVID related, with everyone working from home, employers still have the legal obligation to make sure their employees are in a safe environment, you know, have the right equipment in place and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, potentially you've got claims where people are like, oh, I've got like sore necks, sore backs, or whatever it is, like ergonomic work injury type claims that might come up. That potentially could be something. Again, I don't think it's something very in the near future for this part of the world, but I can see that coming out in the US because they have so many claims anyway for like workplace related injuries, even in the office. I remember when I worked in Australia that, you know, some people had to have special chairs because, you know, they complained of bad backs and things, right? So how are those people working from home nowadays? And surely I feel like that might be something that comes up in the future. It'll be really interesting to see. Nobody else has any other questions? Okay. Well, if that's it from the questions zone, yes, thank you, Azra, for just yeah, I guess we can close off the session. I really thank you all for dialing in today and listening to what I have to say, and hopefully we can continue this discussion in the new year. We can deep dive into some of these risks in much more detail, and we can also talk about your own personal risks, and we can discuss how what's the best sort of ways to be mitigating the risks for your companies. Okay, thank you everyone for joining, and I guess have a good rest of your evening and speak soon.